This is called Who is Joe Average? And I am Leyna Bencomo. I work as the Assistive Technology Specialist for the IT department on permanent full-time loan to the Disability Services Department. That's the way I like to describe it. I'm kind of between two worlds here. So my role at UCCS is to work with students one-on-one, students with disabilities, to help them gain access to UCCS in all its forms, including in the classroom and online classes, as well as the campus in general. And my specific role is via technology. So the second part of my job is generally to train staff and faculty to help them become better at creating accessible materials or to be more aware of barriers they might be putting up for students. So I want to start this. This is called Who is Joe Average, which is kind of fun. Just with a quote from Dan Formosa, who wrote something called Smart Design. He's a designer. We have clients come to us and say, here's our average customer, for instance. She's female, she's 34 years old, she has 2.3 kids. And we listen politely and say, well, that's great, but we don't care about that person. What we really need to do to design is to look at the extremes. The weakest, the person with arthritis, or the athlete, or the strongest, or the fastest person. Because if we understand what the extremes are, the middle will take care of itself. Okay, and that's how we need to think about designing classes. Okay, it's the same kind of thing. All right, so I'm going to use this forward, hopefully. All right, so Joe Average. Who is Joe Average? Here's a lot of pictures of, maybe you can pick out who Joe Average is in here. Depends. These are a lot of different students and people on campus. People of different abilities and races and ages and styles, and there's some familiar people in there you might know. So what we're going to talk about today is the accessibility at UCCS and challenges that some of our students do face, how to create an accessible class, and last thing is, it didn't even come up, that was fun, resources for faculty. Okay, so let's talk about accessibility at UCCS. We have some challenges here, and this is a physical challenge. You can see an example. This is coming out of the library. And if you're needing to have the door open for you because you're in a chair or because you can't push the door open for whatever reason, you'll have to walk all the way over to this door opener and then get yourself back through the little gates to get to the door. And in most cases, the door already starts closing before you can make it back. So here we go. There's one inaccessible example. Now that's a physical example, and it's not something we're going to discuss today. We're going to really talk about technology issues rather than physical issues. Okay, so let's start with the incentives we have for becoming more accessible. And one of the incentives is, some of you may know that the Department of Justice, they received a complaint from a few students at CU Boulder in, I believe it was February of 2014, and they opened an investigation, and they've been sitting on the Boulder campus ever since. And they finally closed it up a month or so ago, a couple months ago. And they were looking at specific things like their use of Google Apps, the fact that students who were blind couldn't get access to digital textbooks in a timely manner. So when class started, they didn't have any textbooks, maybe not for weeks. Digital signage across campus. They had signs up, but there was no way for blind students or low vision students to access that information. And a number of other things. So that brought about a lot of changes on that campus, but since we're all CU, we need to start making some changes here as well. Another thing is there have been a number of lawsuits recently. One that people are frightened about has to do with captioning, and that was for a MOOC called edX, and that's put together by MIT and Harvard, and they have been told that they have to caption all of their classroom material that they have on their online courses. So that's a big deal, and we have a lot of courses that have video that aren't captioned. So we got to start looking at that too. This is a link here. I'm going to give everybody the PowerPoint, and it has a list of a huge amount of lawsuits in higher education for accessibility that have been going on just in the past 3 years, and they're successful suits. So we got to watch our P's and Q's. You can see some of the results in there. Ahead, what happened in 2014 as well is the director of the Disability Services here, Ida Dillwood. She was given permission to hire an external consultant to do an audit of accessibility issues on campus, and she hired a consultant from AHEAD, and AHEAD is the Association of Higher Ed and Disabilities, and it's a huge national group. So they sent somebody out here. She spent $5,000 or something, and they came up with a whole list of changes that we should make, and some of the good things too. And some of them had to do with the classroom. So one of them was that we needed to get our faculty and staff, we needed to have written policies for them, accessibility policies, as well as training. Okay, so this next thing, this is more of a carrot rather than a stick, and that is that 12% of our student population has a reported disability. So if you're going to worry about retention in your class and you want to keep people engaged and staying in your class and not dropping out, you might want to pay attention to those with disabilities as well. And in the population in general, many of the surveys say that it's actually 20% of the population has a disability. Now, some of the disabilities may not affect people in the classrooms. Some of them are just mobility issues and other things that don't affect learning, but the majority of them do. So we still need to worry about at least 12% of the students in the class. The other thing is that faculty members who tend to use universal design techniques or inclusive techniques in their classrooms, they've done surveys, and all of the student population considers those faculty members more aware, more professional, more compassionate. There's always a number of tick marks on that where they are thought of more highly, and they're more highly respected if they have inclusive techniques in their design of their classrooms. And if they willingly promote accessibility before having to be told, oh, by the way, you have a blind student in your class, you need to give us a digital textbook so we can make it accessible for that person. If they already have that down, then they're like, wow, these people are, they are thought of more highly. So, okay, let me move on here, if I can figure this out. Okay, all right. Trying to think what's going on here with my order. Missing all my pages. Okay, here we go. All right, so some of the things that we've already done here at UCCS is, and again in recent times, is we've created an ADA coordinator position. That's the Americans with Disabilities Act coordinator, and that is Jean Durr. She's also the head of HR here. So that position has come into place, and Jean has created an ADA task force, and they meet regularly to discuss issues on campus. And it's composed of people from all over the place on campus, facilities and faculty and even student members and IT and disability services. And then also there are some website changes underway. Some of them you may not have seen yet, but the web developers have purchased a software testing tool that allows them to test for accessibility, and so they're working on that now. And they've also purchased a new, what's called a content management system, which allows them to create pages easily, and it has a lot higher rating of accessibility. So the templates that they're going to start out with are more accessible to begin with. and the ones that they'll allow content managers in the different departments to change, most of that will be taken care of. So that's kind of nice. And then an IT accessibility work group has recently been put together. So all the IT issues on campus hopefully will start to be dealt with. And that's headed by Kirk Moore, who's a director in IT. Okay, and then they hired me. They hired an assistive technology specialist, and that's me. And so I address a lot of accessibility issues. And that I've been here a year now. So that's good. We have done some things. All right. So let's talk about now the challenges that students face here on UCCS, some of them. And there are a number of barriers which we put up. And many of them the faculty can help with. And this is, by the way, is a picture of a scan of a book, which is not a very good scan. You can see some of the words go off the edge. Some things are underlined. There's not a high contrast rate. And this is a problem in specific for people who have what are called print disabilities. They can't read printed materials, so they need a digital version, and then they use software to read it. And this cannot be read by that kind of software because of all the poor quality issues. So I just wanted to show that one. All right, so this is actually what we have been dealing with for the past 40 years or so. Most people think of disabilities as having to do with this person over here has a disability, and this person is the exception. And this person, we need to accommodate this one person. And really, the social model of disability, which has been out here for about 40 years, is more like we have a disabling environment. How can we make our environment less disabling to everyone? Okay, and this is called the social model. And we have a disabling world if we are designing for one Joe Average type person. We're making assumptions, okay, the person that's going to look at this can read, can see, can hear, is 25 years old, has all their facilities. If we design in that way, then we're designing a disabled world, because we're not designing for real people. And that's what we have to do. We're not including everybody. And we're segregating people. So we have to make sure, as we design classes, that we're not isolating and that we're not picking and choosing who is allowed to see our materials. Okay, let's see. So there are all kinds of ways of looking at inaccessibility. And there are a lot of things out there, but I've created my own because I think it's simpler for teachers. So these are some of the things in our environment that faculty members can control. Now, again, materials, if we provide print-only handouts or something, there you go, you've excluded a huge amount of people. People who are blind, people who can't see very well, which includes a lot of older people, people who have dyslexia and other learning disabilities, which doesn't allow them to read well or read effectively, people who have processing issues and they can't comprehend the written word, people who are English as a second language learners, and maybe they only understand English if it's audible, they can't read English very well. So print-only materials is a major issue. So if faculty members can be sure that whatever materials they expect their classes to read, they provide them in a digital accessible format, that's a huge plus. That really helps everybody. So think about that when you're creating your custom textbooks. Make sure you have the bookstore include a digital version, or when you are including handouts, again, make sure you have a digital version of them. Or when you're scanning something in, make sure it's high quality scan. Did you have a question?
Yeah, I was just going to ask, so when I am looking for textbooks, that language, digital, accessible?
It's hard to know.
Okay, so is there something else I can look for that will help me sort of trigger?
It's very difficult right now. What a lot of faculty members have asked for, and this is not just with me, but with all the institutions, is a list of publishers that provide accessible materials. And we really don't have that right now. Things change depending on how the publisher, most of them are working towards more accessible documents. So with textbooks, if you have a specific one in mind and you send it to me, I can find out. I can look it up. I have a number of repositories I can go to who create digital versions of textbooks, and a lot of the publishers have them, and they'll send them their text, and then that repository will adjust it somewhat and make it more accessible. So I can find out specifics, but there's not a real general way of knowing. I mean, one of the things you could do is go onto one of those repositories called Bookshare. If you can look on Bookshare, they have a number of textbooks, and all the ones they have are at least in audio format. So there's an alternate. Another thing you could do is if you went on, say, Amazon and looked for your textbook in Kindle format, and you look under the properties for that textbook, you have to look under the properties where it says text to speech, and it'll say enabled or not enabled. Make sure it's enabled. And that way somebody could get a Kindle version of that book that allows it to be read aloud, text to speech. Okay?
And one last question for you. Do you know if the bookstore will kick it back to saying,
It's not accessible?
right, to
No.
sort of clue aside? No? Okay, cool.
They will
That's what I need
not.
to know.
They will,
All right.
because they are not the content police. The faculty members have free reign over what content they want to present. What happens is if we get a student with a disability who comes to our office and says, I can't get an accessible version of this, then I call the bookstore and they tell me, oh, this is the book, and I contact the publisher and I try and find an accessible version. If we can't get one, we actually have to take the book, debind it, scan it in on a high-speed scanner, take editing software, and sit there and go page by page and edit it. And this, you can imagine, is very time-consuming and labor-intensive. So we've had to do that with a number of books every semester. So I run what's called the Alternate Media Production Lab, and that's what we do. And that's just me and a couple of student workers. So unfortunately, that's what we have to do these days. So yeah, if you're choosing between two books and you want to ask me, please do. Because I'll be very happy to look them up rather than have to do that 100-hour task. So, oh, that's the other thing. Last minute changes are really hard for us. So if you have your textbooks ahead of time, you get the book list to the bookstore in plenty of time, then those students who sign up early and who know they may have issues, we can start looking and converting those textbooks if we have to. But for example, this semester, this fall, we had a student who was blind who was taking an advanced organic chemistry book, organic chemistry. And she knew, and in the summer she was very diligent. She came to us and said, I'm taking organic chemistry. This is the textbook listed. And we could not get an accessible version. So immediately we took it, debound it, and we started scanning and editing. And it took, I don't know, a couple months. But when fall hit, we were almost finished with it. So we started giving her all the chapters. Well, guess what? She showed up to the first day of class, and the teacher changed his mind and said, oh no, we're going to use this one instead. So then all semester long, we've been converting it chapter by chapter as fast as we can for the student and trying to keep up with her syllabus so that she could have the reading material in a reasonable time. And if it's not given to them in a reasonable amount of time, we're already not in compliance with the law. So that person can sue us. So this is a big deal for us. So if we can get faculty to put their book lists out there early, then at least those students who are diligent about registering early and trying to find out what they need, those people will be taken care of. So any help you can give us. So I don't mind questions ahead of time, anytime. That's faster. You have to watch videos, obviously. Your videos, if you're including videos, again, you got to include captions. If you don't have captions, if you at least have a transcript available, that is a big step right there. In fact, if you have a transcript and you do end up with a deaf person in your class who needs captions, the transcript itself will cut down on the cost for us getting captions, and it speeds it up. So anybody who converts videos to having captions, if you have a transcript, that's a huge difference in time and money.
And on that topic, I wanted to ask you a question on that. So at the current moment, that's one of my courses. They have video. I have taken them through and have basically tried and speaked it, and so there's a transcript available.
Great.
But is there a simpler way on this campus for us to do that now? Because that was about 3 years ago when I started that process. And
That's
since
great
time
that you
changes.
did that. That's great. No, that's excellent. We don't have a policy in place.
Not a policy,
So-
but we have.
So
Something
people
else.
have come piecemeal, and I think the Faculty Resource Center will do some captioning. The Disability Services Office will do some captioning. The Multimedia Department in IT will do some captioning. But nobody is doing all the captioning that you have for all the videos for faculty members. So that is still kind of up in the air. So if you're doing that on your own with using Dragon, that's wonderful. If someone ends up with a deaf student in their class and they have inaccessible videos, then one of those 3 groups will probably jump in and make the changes. We also have some departments that outsource to a company called Automatic Sync Technologies. You can Google them, or you can Google Caption Sync. That's their product, and they generally have a very fast turnaround, say 2 days, and their prices are about $1.50 per minute, which is actually excellent. So you can get anything captioned up to the, I forgot what they're called, the National Association of the Deaf, the NAD, up to their standards, perfectly captioned, beautifully done, in a very fast turnaround, so you can publish it right away. Because really, if we were to stay fully compliant, we should not be showing any video to anyone unless we can show it to everyone at the same time. So to stay in compliance, we really shouldn't be showing videos with no captioning. But again, if you know that you have someone in your class, then you definitely better have a caption. Okay, so inaccessible videos are one big thing. Pop quizzes, if you think about, again, pop quizzes can be very difficult for some students, partially because of the print disability. Again, if you're doing a pop quiz, you might want to do it electronically. That'll help some students. Okay, now the other thing is some students don't process as quickly as others. They may have processing delays. And if you have anything that's timed, these students have the accommodation given to them that they can take time and a half, perhaps on tests. But if you have a pop quiz, how are you going to do that? If you're giving everyone 10 minutes to take this quiz, then what are you going to do? Give them a break for 5 minutes while you let the other person take the extra 5? I mean, so pop quizzes can cause some problems. So if you time them, or if you grade them, you may want to rethink that, or find a way to do it for everyone. Inflexibility, I just put that down because we really need to stay flexible in terms of our methodology in classes. And I know faculty members are the experts at learning styles and trying to make sure that everyone's included, as far as people who like to learn visually and people who learn by audio and learn by reading. And most faculty members are excellent at dealing with that. But we want to make sure also to include people. And I've put 4 things down because to me these 4 things are more apropos to teachers. And that is, think about people who have vision issues when you're designing. So anything that you're going to present that's visual, you need to have another format, an alternate format for those people who can't see. Think about people who can't hear. So again, if you're going to present audio of anything, make sure you have an alternate format for that. Think about pace. So what I was saying before, if you have people who have slower processing, and this may include people with traumatic brain injuries who have tinnitus, so they can't concentrate real quickly, who have ADHD, so their attention cannot stay focused. So it takes them longer to process things because they have to overcome that. So think about pace. If you have anything that goes quickly, even a video, if something goes quickly, you want to make sure that they're able to slow it down. So a transcript would be a good way for that, right? Or the video can be paused and repeated. Okay, so pace. And then the fourth one is simplicity. Make sure everything that you do is structured and straightforward and succinct, so that people who have issues with structure, think autism, you want everything to be very straightforward so that those who need it to be that way. And again, think traumatic brain injury, where they need everything to be quite obvious and predictable and understandable in a lower level. Doesn't mean you want to dumb down your classes. You just want to keep them very highly organized in some manner. So those are the four things I think if you think about when you're designing classes, you'll do very well. Okay. All right, so here we're talking about Joe Average again. The average user is created from the combination of all users. It's a formula. What we get is, in fact, a completely different user. No user is the average user. Therefore, when designing for that artificial individual, we create something that doesn't fit anybody's needs. The average user is the representation of a moment, motionless. Real users change constantly, reaching different positions, assuming different roles with different characteristics. In fact, we are all extreme users countless times in our lives. And that's from Susana Gonzalez-Ruiz. And I wanted to say, when designing for Joe Average, we design for a non-person. So it doesn't satisfy anybody. So she has a blog out there, by the way. Her name is Susana Gonzalez-Ruiz, and it talks about designing. So again, you need to keep that in mind. All right, so we're talking about designing for extremes. And we already talked about some of the major changes you can make in your classes. And if you think about yourself, there are times when that automatic door is helpful to you because maybe you have a bag of groceries or a baby or a stroller or something, and then you need to use the ramp or the elevator or the accessible door. There are times when in your life, if you get older, which hopefully we all will, like I have, you start losing some of your eyesight or some of your hearing, or if you are an athlete and you get injured in some way, there you go. You now are a person with a disability and you need accommodations. Or even if you get sick, at that time you may process slower than most people. So you're really not Joe Average all the time. So the majority of people will have some kind of a disability during their life. In fact, I think it's more like 90% or something are disabled at some point, in some way. Okay, so some of the resources for faculty. Again, I'm going to flesh this out later because I feel like I was a little bit lean on this. But there are a lot of things out there, and I'll put more into this later. This is one thing that just recently came out, and this is from the Portland Community College. They have, again, an accessibility coordinator who created a guidebook of accessibility and how to make your classes accessible. This is just one page out of their guidebook, and this page is talking about the syllabus and how to make an accessible syllabus. And one of the things you can do is just learn Microsoft Word really well. Because if you use Microsoft Word, you use the headings in Microsoft Word, that's going to section off your document. And people who are using screen reader software, they can hear the different sections, and they can go to them audibly. So if you use headings, that helps. If you have pictures, you need to make sure you use alternative text, and that's also available in Microsoft Word. You can right-click on any picture or diagram or graph that you have, right-click and use the Alt format descriptor and type in a description of that diagram. Or if you want, just to include it in the text below. The above diagram shows us that blah, 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 blah. That way, those people who have no access to the visual rendition can at least get a text version.
Can I ask you a question? So
Sure.
we're on this. So when we create the document in Word, and we do all the alternative text, but once we put it into PDF form, that goes away, doesn't it?
It loses some of the accessibility. In fact, sometimes it loses a lot of it. So if you're posting something on Blackboard, it sure would be nice if you also post the Word version. And just recently I have a student who is newly blind, who's not very tech savvy, and she's finally got herself to use an iPad successfully. And she uses the Read Aloud software on there, which is called VoiceOver. And that's the only thing she knows. She can't even use a Mac laptop or a PC at all. But she's got that iPad, and we had to send her a textbook. And the most accessible format we have is a Word document. So we sent her a chapter in Word and found out that the images, she couldn't read them on VoiceOver. So we've been experimenting with it. We finally got on a Mac and said, let me open the Word document in Pages, which is the word processor on the Mac. And then we saved it as a Pages document, and then we sent it to her, and it worked. So the accessibility in Word is such that generally it does transfer. Now, Adobe's working on trying to get more of the Word document accessibility transferred to PDFs by default. But there is something called a PDF UA, Universal Access, PDF/UA, and that is what we should strive for. The reason I don't push PDFs, even though faculty members and people seem to save most of their stuff in PDF format, is because most people don't work in that arena. So you don't create your documents in Adobe and put tags on them and all that. Most people work in a word processor and then export to PDF. So if you get that word processor version or InDesign version or whatever accessible, and then you export to PDF, great. We can at least call you and go, okay, do you have the Word version? Can you send that to us? Or if you want to post it yourself on Blackboard, you know, the Word version and the PDF version. That's helpful. Just having them both out there. Tables, there's a lot to do with tables, including table column headers. Make sure you have those. You should look at color contrast. Make sure that's high enough for people who can't see very well. All these instructions are on this guidebook, and I do have the link on this PowerPoint, so you can look at that. There's another place, Washington State University. They got a huge grant, and they created this Do It area. I forgot what it stands for now, but if you go to Washington State and look at accessibility, they have created brochures that you can get for free for almost every single thing you need. In the classroom, how to set up an accessible classroom, how to do an accessible presentation, how to do an accessible Excel spreadsheet, just hints for teachers. I just pulled in a page, but they have a ton of things in there. And they're available to the public, and they're up to date. They're very explicit in their directions. And there's one more that I forgot to include, and they create cheat sheets, one-page cheat sheets. And I've brought that to previous classes, so I'll make sure I add it on to here. And those are nice ones too. I forgot the organization. And then the last one I wanted to make sure you guys know is you can always call our disability services area, because part of their mission is also to help faculty members. So when you are writing a course, if you're unsure, or if you're like, I have no clue how to make this online lab section of my class accessible, or whatever they call them. What do they call them now? Online learning studios, all those various tools that are out there. what do you call
Modules.
them? Modules. All these various things that might be difficult for some of our students. If you talk to disability services, they'll spend time trying to figure out how to make it accessible. Or they will contact me and I can look it up too. And we can talk to the publishers and the vendors and say, hey, are you working on getting this accessible? Okay, I've also included some of the links. There's that list of lawsuits in higher ed, in case you want to look at them. The social model of disability, there's a whole write-up on that. How to design for the extremes. And a lot of the statistics about people with disabilities, just for your awareness. If anybody needs specific classes or a one-on-one, give us a call, give me a call, or give Disability Services, and we will create those for you.